I would speak on family matters, that Brittany Thiessen would dress up like Steve Urkel. I read that on Facebook. I was all excited, and I come here, and I see no Steve Urkel. I have not seen Steve Urkel yet, so I'm a little disappointed this morning. Kind of starting off on a bit of a low note. We'll see if we can recover from this. This morning, we are going to be launching a new series. I'm going to be talking about family and conflict. So if you got any questions, anything you think I haven't got into enough, or you have some further follow-up, or you disagree with me, or even just an interesting story or something to back it up, you can text me, email me, Facebook me, any of the questions. If you text me, I can't guarantee that I'll respond in church. I'm going to try to deal with one or two questions at the end of the service, but I promise if you do contact me, I will get back to you throughout the week. And so if you have anything follow-up or questions, by all means, just let me know. So we're talking about this family series, and there's a couple of different angles we're going to be heading at it with. But this morning, I talk about the kind of 800-pound gorilla in the room. Because the reality is, if you have family, be this church family, blood family, the family that you choose to surround yourself with as you get older, if you care about them, you've had conflict. And probably the less close you are to a family member, be this in the church or in your household or in your extended family, probably the less conflict you've had. Or if you've had the conflict and now you're maybe very distant, right? Maybe that's why you are distant, but it was the conflict that made you distant. It seems like the more we love somebody, the more we argue, fight, wrestle, tussle, the more conflict that seems to come out of that relationship. Like, what's the deal with that? It's kind of the same way in the Bible, too. I mean, you're looking at healthy examples of well-working families. You're pretty hard-pressed, actually. Pretty much all of the families from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel, these are bad examples of troubles in families. I mean, even Jesus' family left him in the temple when he was 12 years old. There's a sense that family has a difficult aspect to it, which I want to kind of take a look at. It seems like it's so easy to get suckered into these arguments and fights and conflicts, isn't it? They're so subtle. And also we find ourselves in these conflicts. It's about stuff we often don't care about. Like I don't know, where to put the shoes or some little comment we don't really care about, or how to share a blanket, or whose room isn't clean, or these little minutiae of living. It's not necessarily always the big things. And even when it is the big things, like how to raise your kids, or, money issues of love and respect, or, whatever, big things, we don't need a shrink to tell us that it's not generally helpful to have a full-blown conflict and yelling and argument and, giving your coworker the cold shoulder is probably not going to further your cause. Or if you're volunteering together with somebody in the church and you are lippy and gossipy and disrespectful, you're probably not going to get their attention, right? And here's a question. What do we hope to win with these conflicts? Like, if you win an argument with your family, do you ever actually win anything? Has anybody ever sat down and thought, good, I'm glad I had that argument. We yelled a bit. Things were really tense. I think I pushed my point. Now they all understand me, and everybody's going to listen to what I say, and that's done now. This is great. This was very helpful. Maybe you've thought that. I think there's some times in my life where I've thought that. In hindsight, I was always wrong. It never actually worked. No lasting change has ever come from this kind of conflict. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, I hope my spouse hears this. They really need to be here this morning. Maybe some of you came and got excited about this message so that your spouse, your kids, or your grandparents, or somebody else would come along. Maybe you're thinking, well, I don't really have a lot of conflict. It's the people around me who are causing the conflict. Guess what? The people around you are thinking the same thing, but about you. Because we all have conflict. There's different kinds of conflicts, though. There's a couple of different conflict styles, which maybe you'd identify with. I don't know. There's the soother, for instance. Not necessarily the baby pacifier, but it kind of works the same way. When there's a conflict, they just want to kind of cork the cry hole. Just kind of stop the issue. They don't really want to deal with it. They don't want to bring it up. They're usually very willing to take responsibility for the issue, and just take all of it. It's my fault. It's my fault the dog didn't get walked. Yeah, but you weren't home all day. Yeah, it's my fault. I don't know. They just want it to go away. They just want everything to go smooth and peaceful, right? And this isn't a bad thing necessarily in the right place and the right ratio. But if you have a soother who features prominently in your family, church family, or your home family, chances are you have a lot of very legitimate but very unresolved issues. Because if you'd have a sliver and you treat it like the soother, you just leave it there. It just sits there forever. This is what I like to call Cold War conflict. But it's still conflict. It's still real. Or maybe you might identify more as a sulker. And this is the classic caricature of the teenager, although honestly, I've seen, I think, the same ratio grow up from teenager straight into adulthood. Now, if you're a sulker, they'll never argue or have conflict with you directly. They'll say things like, it's fine. It's fine. What's wrong? Oh, it's fine. It's nothing. Nothing's all good. But they'll shoot barbs and comments and looks and stuff at you to let you know it's not fine, but you can never actually really deal with it directly. So it's all this kind of indirect comment and this kind of bad air that floats there. So if you're a sulker, if you're a sliver, rather than just leaving it there, what you're going to do is you're going to pull it halfway out and then shove it back in. And then halfway out and shove it back in. And halfway out and shove it back. And it's going to fester for a long time. Again, a lot of unresolved issues. It's a lot of stuff not talked about, but kind of talked about at the same time. Or maybe you're a stuffer. Stuffers, when they face a conflict, right, they'll use the first person plural a lot. That's words like let's and we. They'll say things like let's just shove that down. Let's just not talk about that. We're just going to ignore that for right now. Let's just not deal with that right now. We don't get together that much as a family, and so let's all just have a good time right now. And everything just kind of gets bottled down into this neurotic little part of your soul. And it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole, right? Because as soon as you shove one thing down, it pops up somewhere else. And stuffers are generally a little edgy. They're sensitive on certain things, and it seems like the weirdest things will set them off sometimes, right? Because the issue you're dealing with is not the issue, because the real issue is being stuffed down so far. Or maybe you're more like the litigator. That's me. I'm the classic litigator. I think I might be the most frustrating human being in the world to argue with because I'm right. And here's the thing. I actually usually am right. Like, for real. Yeah, Destiny's not here. See, Sunday school started. Destiny's gone. I can say whatever I want. No, but here's the thing. In any argument, there's almost always some stuff you're right about and some stuff you're wrong about, technically speaking. All right, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but technically speaking, the litigator, people like me, we're great at somehow making the stuff they're right about the thing the argument's about, and the stuff they're wrong about kind of peripheral. And, maybe we apologize for them some of that stuff, and whatever, didn't really mean to do that, whatever. But here's the issue we're talking about, right? And so we actually are always right because we make it about what we're right about. Right? And we're great at crafting arguments and being logical and rational and making sure that the right things get said at the right time. Right? But nobody gets heard, nobody felt listened to, and nothing actually really gets done. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got will have to probably remain anonymous because it was probably 15 or so years ago. And I have no clue who it was who said this to me. But somebody pulled me aside one time and said, what you're saying can be true, but still not helpful. That blew my mind. No, but truth is truth, and truth should be helpful. What you're saying can be true, but not helpful. You could be technically right, and you can destroy a relationship. Is that a good balance? So that's the thing with the litigator. Or maybe you're the screamer, right? The shouter. And this is what we think of probably as the classic kind of archetype of the argument where you shout and yell. And if you were a shouter, probably you came from a family of shouters. And it wasn't necessarily always angry. Maybe it was. But it wasn't always necessarily like bitter shouting. But people were just expressing themselves. They would express themselves. They'd get the emotions out on the table. And then everyone would kind of part. And then they were good with it. They maybe didn't carry lasting baggage. It's not always a bad thing to be able to get it out there. But here's the deal. If you're a shouter, almost guarantee you married one of the other kinds of personality types. Or your boss is one of the other kind of personality types. Or your best friend is one of the other kind of personality types because opposites often do attract. And here's the thing. The first time you ever had an argument and you expressed yourself, you were a little bit mad and you wanted them to know about it. They looked at you like there was some sort of demon in you trying to come out because they'd never heard shouting before. This was crazy. And all of a sudden you realize this little problem has become a very big problem, and you don't know how you got there, how to get yourself out of it, but you're in a jam. So what do? I mean, there's all these different types of arguers, and there's probably more you could come up with if you thought long enough. And there's all these different types of arguers, and there's these combinations of different kind of relationships. So what is there to say that could be relevant on a Sunday morning to a topic as big as family conflict? Very interesting. You see, there's let's say, for instance, the Bell and Hart 8 models of conflict. So there would be conflicting resources, conflicting styles, conflicting personal values, and 5 other ones I can't remember. But here's the interesting thing about some of these conflict styles I was looking into. They're all very right. You might argue about conflicting resources, or a conflicting style, or a conflicting personal value, but you might not. I don't think we're really learning anything new by studying this sort of thing. I mean, I know that sometimes I have an argument about somebody's, because we have personal value differences, but I also know I sometimes don't. Like some of us might have very big personal value differences and still be able to get along, but if Destiny and me have a very small personal value difference, man, that's a hotbed for conflict. So what are we really learning? Those are just things we might have conflict about. What we want to know is why. Why do we fight? Why do we fight with those we love? Why do we fight with those we care about? Why do we get suckered into these crazy, stupid, useless, pointless arguments that go nowhere and spiral out of control? And why do we find it so hard to just say we're sorry sometimes? You know, James, the book of James, the author James from the Bible, he actually has a really interesting point about this. This is really, really simple, really insightful, really deep, really short, and I think really, really powerful. So you want to turn with me to James chapter 4. I want to take a look at what James says about this. This is verse 1 to 3. He says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you?" So here we go. As broad as possible, there's fights and quarrels among you. What is it? Why do you have them? Is there one common root that has all these different symptoms of problems that look all these different ways? Is there one common thing we can try to address? He thinks so. He says, "Don't they come from your desires that battle within you?" You have desires. But James, it takes 2 people to have a conflict. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't actually. It takes 1 person to have a conflict. Has anybody ever said something fairly innocuous, fairly mundane, fairly normal, and you overreacted at them and started a fight right there? It only takes 1 person to have a conflict. And James is pointing the magnifying glass squarely at you, or me. He's pointing it straight at us. He says, "Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill." And this isn't necessarily literal killing. This is metaphorically to some extent, although it could get bad enough, I suppose. But killing someone's spirit, killing someone's sense of self-worth, killing someone's autonomy, killing someone's opinion, killing someone emotionally in the moment. You desire something, so you kill, you manipulate, you control. You covet, you want, you need. But you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Look how much he says you covet. But you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. It says, "You do not have because you do not ask God." And when you ask, you don't receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend it on your pleasures. Now notice something here. This is I think, super, super important. And I don't want anybody to miss me on this one, or misunderstand me, or pass this one by. James is not saying that your desire, or need, or want, or expectation is illegitimate. He's not saying it's a bad desire, want, need, or expectation. What he is saying is, you're putting your expectation on someone else who either cannot or will not meet it. And that's why you fight. He's saying you don't ask God, or if you do with the wrong motives, and so you end up putting that expectation, that burden on someone else, something else. And right there is the conflict. And if you miss everything else today, if you forget everything else I've said, the one thing I want you to remember is this: conflict grows out of the burden of unmet expectation. Conflict grows out of the burden of unmet expectation. As you pile on a burden of expectation, of need, of want, maybe legitimate, you become rife with conflict. Proverbs, if you've never read Proverbs, I encourage you to do so. Absolutely. Just don't rush through it because it's kind of dense and meaty, but it's super transformative. Maybe if you're going to read through Proverbs, tackle like a chapter a week and just read it a few times in a week and really kind of stew on what it means because it is kind of dense, I'll give you that. But it's awesome because James takes this giant concept and turns it into a paragraph. Proverbs takes this giant concept and turns it into like a half a sentence. Proverbs 28:25. A greedy person provokes conflict, but whoever trusts in the Lord will prosper. Nailing conflict straight down to greed. You want, you need, you expect, and are not getting, so you cause a fight and quarrel among you. It's the same idea. It's just kind of zipped down into a little sentence you can put on a fridge magnet. Now, I know what you're saying. I can hear the objections already. Yeah, but Jason, he promised me he would. Or she promised me she never would again. Or he owes me. Or don't I have a right to? But that is my child, and aren't I? Yes, maybe. Maybe your need, your want, your desire is legitimate. That's not what I'm saying. But as soon as you place that expectation on someone else, you have burdened them with something they were not designed to carry. God hasn't enabled them to carry at this moment. Or they're not engaging with God on how to carry it. And you can't make them. And out of that expectation, conflict grows. Imagine what would happen if you own this. If we as a church own this. If you, in your marriage, or with your kids, or with your parents, or with your boss, really own this. Would this change anything? Would this change the way you talk to them when you're upset? Would this change the way you come to these people when you have a legitimate request? Would this help at all? If you realize that at least something of the reason why we're fighting, why we have this log jam, is because I have a need or desire or expectation that isn't being met. What if the next time you were fighting with your wife or your husband or your kid, you just stopped? You just stopped and paused and said, you know what? I think part of the reason why we have this conflict because I'm expecting something from you that you're not able or not willing to meet. And that my expectation is part of why we're having this argument. Would it change anything? Would it give room for conversation? Now, I think you all see the problem here, though. Because as soon as you say that, you're kind of cutting the tree branch out right from underneath you. You're losing the argument. You're giving up your leverage in the argument to the other person. I think so. I'm a classic litigator, and I like to know who's where, what, and have my scoring system going on. And I know that if I would say, I'm certainly part of the problem, and my expectations on you are causing this conflict, well, poof, I've just lost my leverage. Andy Stanley has a nice little pithy phrase. He says, if you own a slice, you got to be nice. If you imagine your argument like a pie, right? And even if your slice of the pie is 2%, if you own a slice, you got to be nice because you've got to admit you're at least 2% part of the problem. And you got to work on your 2% before you start burdening the other 98% of the expectation on somebody else. Because if you can't work on your little tiny 2%, how are you expecting someone else to solve their big, gigantic 98%? If you're not even willing to work on your 2%. That's why James says you, and doesn't try to guess what the other person's motives might be. He says you got to deal with you. It wouldn't be a conflict if you weren't also conflicting with them. The thing about losing your leverage and losing the argument is, like I said before, you don't win anything when you win an argument against your family. There's no prize at the end of an argument for best arguer. Most winningest spouse has never been a prize given out anywhere. If you win an argument at work, you might get a promotion. You might get fired, but you might get a promotion. It's possible. If you win an argument in court, you might get your ticket reduced. And if you win an argument against your friends, you might actually go up in their respect. But if you win an argument with your family, everyone loses. Everyone loses every time. You can't win an argument against your family and win anything. But you can lose on terms that give you the ability to repair a relationship. You can lose on terms that gives the other person the space, the ability, the resources, the energy to pick themselves up and rebuild the relationship. Now, I can't guarantee you they'll take this. This isn't some magic formula that if you apply, everything will go well. Right? This isn't some magic formula. If you trust God with your expectations, your kids are guaranteed to turn out perfect. It's not like that. They still have to make their own choice. Your spouse has to make their own choice. Your boss has to make their own choice. However it is, they've got to make their own choice. This is for dealing with conflict and giving the other person the room to make the choice and become who they want to become, so you can partner with them. And conflict won't bully somebody into a healthy relationship. But unburdening them from your unmet expectations might. One of the things I think parents are often the worst at is just wanting their kids to be like them, only not making the mistakes they made. They're good at baseball, I want you to be good at baseball. If you're good at accounting, you want your kids to be good at accounting. If you're a farmer, you want your kids to take over the farm, whatever it is. And we have these expectations. And they're not necessarily bad. You know, I'm a believer, and I went through a hard time as a teenager, but I came to see, the power of the Holy Spirit in my life, and I want my kids to as well. That is like the most legitimate expectation ever. But you've got to lay that expectation at the feet of God. Now, that doesn't mean you just pull back and go, okay, well, God, you raised my kids, and we'll see what happens. That's not how this goes. You still have to pour into them and plug into them and love them. And if they're your kids, sometimes discipline them. Right? Guidance when they're younger. But out of love with the expectation, the burden of that expectation on God, He's big enough to have it and carry it without conflict with you, without arguing with you. But your son or daughter or spouse isn't. Maybe you just want what's best for your spouse. Maybe you know what would be better for your company than your boss does. And you just really want to help. And that's legitimate. But you can't make it happen. You have to lay that conflict, that expectation on God, because it's out of the burden of unmet expectations that conflict grows. And conflict does not produce healthy fruit. This does not guarantee that all the bad issues in your life are going to go away. People will still come at you, be mean to you sometimes, be disrespectful, be callous, ignore you, or whatever, even if you're fulfilling this perfectly. Because this isn't about them, this is about you. But that doesn't mean you have to be in constant conflict, going to battle, making war with other people. They might still be treating you poorly, but you'll be treating them the way God treated you, which was not with the expectation, but that yet while we were still sinners, Jesus came. Not with the expectation that you better first come towards me, or if I die on the cross for you, then you had better come meet me after that. He said, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to serve you, love you, care for you, sacrifice for you, right now, where you are, out of love for you, no strings attached, no expectation burdened on top of you, because He knew you couldn't handle that expectation. It was too big for you. It's too big for you. And yet, as soon as we enter into a relationship, we want to shovel a little bit of our expectations on the other person. It's too big for them. We need to put it where it belongs, on the God who can carry it. Not all bad issues are conflicts. Not all conflicts are all entirely your fault. But is there a slice you can own? And is there something you can give to God? I want to end with a challenge. See, because while I was talking, I guarantee you were thinking of at least one person. This morning, you've thought of at least one person that this either applied to or was forefront in your mind. Probably someone quite close to you, like a parent or a spouse or whoever. So I want you to keep thinking about that person this week. You were already thinking about them this morning. You were probably applying a lot of what I said to that person while I was talking, so you may as well apply some of it to yourself throughout the week as you keep thinking about it. Who in your family is suffering because you are not getting your way? Who in your family are you burdening with expectations they cannot or will not right now meet? Just answer that question in your mind right now. And ask yourself this: how does that expectation, how can I turn that expectation into trust in God? How can I put that expectation where it belongs and take it off of that person and let them know about it? Who in your family is suffering under the burden of your possibly legitimate, unmet expectation? I'm going to ask the worship band to come up in a couple of seconds and close in song. But I'd just like to take a few minutes right now and just pray for you guys. Because I'm not foolish about this. I know how hard this is. I've got people in my mind I'm thinking about as we're talking about this. And even throughout this last week or two as I've been preparing this, I've been trying to apply this. And I can tell you, it's difficult. Very difficult. Especially since most of these people, we've had a long history building up a certain type of interaction and relationship with that we tend to default to. So we're trying to break a default while breaking a habit, while breaking a sin. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. But who in your family is suffering because you are burdening them with your unmet expectation, and how can you relieve them of that expectation? I ask you to bow with me. Close your eyes. Oh, Father God, we so often miss the boat on this and place our needs and wants and desires square on other people and not on you. And God, we just come before you right now collectively, and ask you to forgive us of our misplaced expectations. God, I thank you that you're gracious and forgiving, slow to anger, and rich in love. God, just flow through us right now this morning as we're sitting here, placing deeply and clearly on our mind the person we have most been burdening with our expectations, even the person we don't necessarily recognize as that. And God, I ask you to show us clear and concise steps how we can relieve them of that. God, I ask you just to take that burden from us. And Lord, that person or people in our life who are burdening us, God, if they weren't here, God, it's your message, it's your word, it's your spirit. You can move in them just fine. God, help us to release that. Not manipulatively, but just to be able to release it. Move in those people as well. Just so we can feel unburdened and can unburden someone else. God, I ask for a complete and total change of heart this week as the people here, the people in our church family really try to put their expectations where it belongs, show that trust in you, God, and grow in faith. God, I ask for a relief for those people. I just feel right now like there's just maybe 2 or 3 people who are so burdened down by that conflict, by that constant argument, by that family relationship problem that they don't even want to try. They know what I'm talking about. They know what the Bible says. They hear it. They get it. And in their heart, they're just saying, you know what? I don't care anymore. It's done. It's broken. It's too late. I can't do it. It's the other person's move first. I'm done. God, I ask that you would move in that person, give them the energy, the ability, the insight to just try one more time, to pick themselves up, dust themselves off. God, just thinking of the sacrifice of your son, Jesus, and the great service he did to us. They dust themselves off and try one more time. And God, for the person who tries this, who unburdens their child and sees their child make some negative decisions in the next couple of weeks, God, I pray they wouldn't live with that guilt, but they would realize that as they release their expectations, God, you take responsibility of the life fully devoted to you, and that God, that you'd be able to put their kids, their child's life in your hands, that you would minister to them, grow them, guide them, protect them. Lord, show them the right touch to balance that tension between intervention and releasing their kids this week. Lord, I pray for your blessing on the people here that are here this morning. In your precious and holy name.